Welcome to the It's Time podcast with your host, Professor Dale Feinauer, from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.
Welcome to another It's Time podcast, an offering of the UW-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs. I'm your host, Dale Feinauer. Once again, we're here at A.J. Armstrong Studios to help throw a little more fuel on the flame of your desire to enhance your business management skills. Today, as for all of this first season, we're focused on leadership. I'm very happy today we have Mike Riegsecker here, who is with Menasha Corp. And I'd ask you, Mike, could you tell us a little bit about the organization you work for and what your role is? What do you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Dale. And I'm excited to be here. And Menasha Corporation is just a great company. And I work for Menasha Packaging. I'm the president of Menasha Packaging. Menasha Packaging today does corrugated packaging, folding carton. We do custom combined services in over 50 locations across the United States. We're headquartered in Menasha, Wisconsin, and we've got an exciting story, and it's been an awesome privately held company to work for.
Great. So you're president. Well, for people who may not be aware of what that means, and no doubt varies across organizations, what do you do?
So we do a lot of things, but it's all encompassing of all the functions of a business. So finance and sales and operations and pricing and human resources and all those things that come together. I've been in this role since 2018 and have over 30 years of experience in the company today.
Sounds like boredom isn't a significant problem for you at work.
Days go by quick, for sure.
Well, tell us about you. Tell us about how you became the leader you are today.
Well, I started, I've done a lot of different things throughout my career. And so I would say it's a combination of learnings from all of those things. I've moved around to different geographies with different assignments. I have started in operations before moving into sales and had, a variety of business experiences in different fields that I think have allowed me to kind of understand, those areas, those dynamics, the leadership that's required when you can be with a team every day in the same room, or whether your team is spread out in many different geographies. What are some of the things that you might need to think about?
So your first leadership role was in operations.
It was the first 8 years. So
what'd you learn from that experience? What was that like?
It was supervisory. It was, folks that were running machines and working on things and just getting to know people and what drives them. I remember one of the very first things I did that kind of, people looked at me a little strange, but I sent every one of my direct reports a Christmas card in the very first year that I came. And it's just about connecting with people, understanding who they are, and they really can open up to you if you kind of think about things through that lens.
So you sent them all Christmas card. You mailed them a Christmas card home?
I mailed them a Christmas card home, found out their spouses or significant other names, and just sent them a little something from the family. And maybe the first time that ever happened from their direct supervisor at work before.
All right. Well, I find that fascinating. My perception is we often don't pay enough attention to the spouses, the significant others. Do you think that's true? How do you try and connect with them? Is that important?
Well, I think it is. I think, we spend more time with each other at work than people do with their families. That's just a fact. And it's important that our families know who we work with. And so that's a big part of kind of keeping the whole thing together and creating events that allow us to get to know those people are important, I think, and there's small ways that we can do it.
Great. You send them all Christmas cards, so you're trying to connect with them as individuals. One of the things I hear from young folks is the challenge of how much do I be a friend? How much do I connect? How do I draw the line? You're the new manager. Hey, Friday after work, a bunch of us tend to go out and have a beer. It is Wisconsin. You go out and have a beer.
Yeah.
You go out and have a drink with your direct reports. How do you draw that line between the manager and a friend?
Yeah, I've never really found that to be that challenging. I mean, I think it's important that work environments do things together. So whether that's, happy hours as a group, or those kinds of things, probably not individually one-on-one with direct reports as much is not what I would remember, throughout my career is what happens. So I think creating events where people can connect and be social and not have a work related topic to actually have to do each time you're together. It's important to have a few of those in the mix. Um,
So you have some social events, some bonding experiences in addition to the work.
yeah. And then, people want clear and honest feedback. And if you can establish that early in a relationship, then people, I think, really appreciate that.
So you're able to do both, building some social relationship, but still able to make the hard decisions, look them dead in the eye. Hey, this isn't working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Fascinating. Any advice on how you do that? How do you make that combination happen?
You know, um, one way is to not do it all just without planning it. And so I do think you have to structure time for certain parts of a relationship, where other parts of a relationship can be very much, just walking into somebody's door or running into them in the hall. There's both kinds of communication are critically important. But I think when you think about feedback and you think about putting formal time in the calendar to do it, that's important.
So you consciously, strategically schedule, think about these various aspects of relationships and
Yeah, I don't think that
program it.
it doesn't have to be programmed all the time. It doesn't have to be that overly programmed, but if there's not some time set aside to have a conversation, I often call it structured time for unstructured conversation. But unless you can slow things down around you with your direct report or whoever it is, even in a matrixed organization up here, to have a conversation about what's going on, what we need to do to improve. It's tough to do because everybody's got hundreds of emails. Everybody's phone is ringing. You know, business moves at 1,000 miles an hour, and you got to find the moments to slow it down. And I love to call it structured time for unstructured conversations.
That's a fascinating concept. Structured time for unstructured conversations for building the relationship.
Yep.
I hear some managers talk about they feel distracted by the problem so much that they don't get to work on improvement. Is this kind of part of making sure you've got some improvement balance, not just problems?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's critical that we can step back from the problems that are occurring, around us and try to prioritize and think about the right solutions um, to go after, not just the easiest solution to grab. So,
Okay, and have time to do
and
that,
time to do it.
program that in.
Yeah, no question.
Good. Um, you're a leader. You've been a leader for a while. When did you first start to conceptualize yourself as being a leader? If you think back a little introspection here, did you, were you 10 and thinking, yeah, I'm going to be a leader someday?
Yeah. Well, it probably started at school. I actually graduated from Purdue University, and
Very good.
from organizational leadership was the degree that I took on, and it was a very interesting kind of new degree. But it was all of our classwork and coursework at that time were around how to connect with people and core leadership opportunities, and certainly think I had an opportunity to refine that in those early manufacturing days. Um,
So Mike's graduating high school, going off to college. What motivated you to think organizational leadership? Yeah, that's the major for me.
I don't know. I'm probably like any other of college kid that doesn't know exactly what they want to do. I just sort of found it along the way. Um, and it just really clicked once I got into it.
And it
And,
happened.
and it happened. Absolutely.
Okay. How would you describe your leadership style?
You know, I would say leadership by, uh, I, I, I like to walk around. I like to go see things. It's important that um, what's happening on the ground. And so, uh, those things are super important to the way I lead today. I spend a great deal of time thinking about our business opportunities and how do I create And I'm back on the structured time for unstructured. I do think about that as a core fundamental in the way I lead. So even around business strategy, around how to solve business problems that are difficult for the organization to solve, it is about getting people out of the environment, slowing down, understanding the problem, and asking five whys and why the problem is occurring. There's so many people in business that are just wired to, I'm going to get a result, I'm going to get it tomorrow, I'm going to grab the first solution, the easiest solution. We think it's the right solution,
Go.
but it might go. And it's, we've done a lot of personality, like our team is wired that way. I'm wired that way, having some self consciousness about that, and how do you slow down to really, to be able to think about things a little bit more broadly.
So if I'm hearing this right, the structured time for unstructured discussion isn't just a leadership relationship building
Yep.
component, but it's a decision making. It's a way you go about leading that you want to have some introspective time.
Right. And I think it's about who you use as a partner, like to think about how to do it. So, it's really easy to say, well, we have a sales problem or we have an operations problem. I'm just going to go to those folks that lead that. And it might be, it's a really complex challenge, and might be talking to your HR person or your continuous improvement people about, okay, how do we gain the input? Who should be in the room? How do we create diversity of thinking so that we get the best possible solution? And you just have to slow down at times, not on everything, but just sometimes when the problems are really challenging.
Interesting. So it sounds like you're being very intentional about who's involved in making the decision, who to participate, how to focus it, thinking of this thing through.
Absolutely. There's a time and a place to say who's doing what by when, and we got to go do it tomorrow. And that's sometimes, but I think the problems that create a lot of value in the organization, especially, typically need to be slowed down a little bit so that you can think of.
All right. Now you're looking to have people think through these things. You got this group of folks together, but you're the guy. You're the president. You're well up the food chain. These people's careers are to some extent dependent on you. Do you want them to be challenging you in terms of what's the right answer? Or are you a group of folks thinking it through, or do you pretty much tell them what the right answer is because you're the guy?
Well, I think you need everyone in an organization, and I've not done every job in the organization, and I'm not an expert at every job that occurs within the organization. So, that's just something I think I've learned in my career, that the more, you've got your certain set of experiences that you've lived, and you have, and those are things you bring to the table every time, but that's only a part of the total story. Um, when you really look at the complex issues of a business faces,
So you need all those different perspectives to make a good decision.
you really do.
Um, how do you get those folks to be comfortable challenging you? So you walk in saying, well, I think maybe the right answer is X.
I think just asking questions is a critical
Go on.
aspect of leadership, and checking for clarifying, for understanding, when people are telling you things, because not everybody communicates in ways what they might be thinking is easily, you're easy to dissect it. And so just really probing and playing things back, and making sure voices are heard around the table are probably one of the more important things you can do as a leader.
So it sounds to me that when you're in this discussion, you're more managing the process. You're more thinking about who ought to be in the room. Am I listening to everybody? Than you are driving the answer that you've walked in thinking is the right answer.
I don't think it's about that at all. I mean, I think we've all learned from those experiences, when you pre-populate an answer and you invite a team to give their opinion. If you're not prepared to kind of walk out of there with a bit of a different answer, then people will respond very negatively to that. And that's the fine balance. Like, if you know the solution, just tell us. That's what people will say.
Right.
If you want us to come in and create one, then I think that can be a very rewarding experience for everybody that's involved in that.
And from what you said earlier, there may be times that you walk in and say, "Here's the solution."
Sure.
And that's okay as a manager to say, "Look, I'm in charge. The answer is X. Go."
Yeah, I think absolutely that's okay at times. So, I mean, you're always checking in with the group, but not every decision needs a process.
And now, a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh offers the first of its kind MBA executive program in Northeast Wisconsin. Cohorts meet on weekends at the Appleton Executive Education Center with options available in a 12 or 16-month timeline. The results-driven MBA executive program provides an education that is both relevant and actionable, so you can take the knowledge you learn on Saturday and immediately apply it at work on Monday. No GRE or GMAT required. See if the MBA executive program is right for you by visiting uwo.sh/EMBA. That's uwo.sh/EMBA. It's time to achieve more with a graduate degree from UW-Oshkosh.
I hear some managers, maybe younger managers, who have so absorbed themselves in the employee empowerment role that they're uncomfortable with the concept of looking at a subordinate dead in the eye and saying, no, this is the answer, go. How do you explain to them why that's okay?
Yeah, I think accountability, and it's just always fascinating to see certain people in an organization that just are really comfortable with accountability and decision making and feel empowered in their jobs. And if I make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. And others that are really reluctant to do the same thing. So everybody responds differently, but it is about creating an environment where if somebody makes a mistake, it's not the end of the world. And it never is. It's hard to think about where one decision is a defining moment. It just doesn't work that way.
Right. You're not the president of the United States with your finger on the button.
Right. Exactly. And so it really is about, preparing people to be in the best position to make the best decision if they're called on.
Accountability. What role does accountability play in your leadership style?
Well, I think there's a number of ways. Certainly alignment to metrics is a key fundamental that people have to know, what they're driving towards, and alignment around values and around the way that we want to operate in the organization is just a fundamental, and you have to invest some time in making sure that's the culture that exists. And then I find that, asking people to report out on how they're doing versus reporting to them how they're doing is a really critical way to kind of test for understanding of folks. Like, do they understand the accountability that's in front of them? And kind of a story. I remember one thing in the operational world that I was in many years ago. It was the first time I kind of learned that. But our schedulers would tell all of our supervisors how we did the day before in our morning meeting, and just a simple thing where now each supervisor had to bring how they did the day before in that same meeting, same people, but it had a pretty profoundly changing effect on the dynamic of accountability and ownership that people felt.
That's fascinating. Talk about that. They felt more than ownership?
I think
what
so.
Happened?
It's just, I get in the morning, I got to figure out what we did yesterday. I'm the one, it's my voice that's talking about how we did, that day. And it was just a small thing versus, walking into a meeting where maybe they didn't know how they did the day before because the scheduler would tell them because they were kind of wrapping up the performance for everybody.
And they didn't have to own how they did the day before.
And just in the way they reported out, just a really small thing.
Question, self-awareness, the ability to self-reflect. Are those important characteristics for a leader?
Yeah, I think they're huge. And it's hard to find time to do that. That is one of the most challenging things a leader faces today. Another one of those areas where it's structured time for unstructured way to kind of do reflection. I keep a notebook. I've done it in my garage because I can't do it at work because there's too much noise, around. But
why your garage? I assume you have a house with a room you could do it in.
I do, but with a broom in my hand, it's actually kind of therapeutic to
Go
to
on.
clean the garage a couple of times a year, and those become reflection points. I kind of prefer that my wife doesn't help me, on those days with that project, and literally a notepad on the workbench. Well, I'm maybe spending an afternoon, and so just some examples of things that I've used for self-reflection. I've done better over times at journaling. That's tough, but that is very powerful. To be able to do that as a leader as well, and classes to help keep it current. It has been helpful. I've had a lot of opportunities over my career at Menasha just to engage in development opportunities that, you hear it. It's hard to do. It takes discipline
Right.
to do the self-reflection thing, but
Then do you encourage those that are leaders in your organization that report to you to engage in self-reflection and self-analysis?
yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, but it probably not quite as much as I should, reflecting on that. I think, but the folks that excel, especially, continue to grow in their careers, it's a fundamental that is important.
Okay. I'm guessing at some point, I'm going to go on a limb here, that in some of that reflection, you've at least once identified that you did something that wasn't ideal. You've had some failure in your career, at least once. What have you learned from failure?
Well, I think like one of the things that I've learned that's quite interesting.
I like the way your eyes just lit up.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I've learned from failing.
No, there's been multiple. I think that's you got to be able to talk about them. But I do remember one of the things I like to do is checkouts at the end of meetings, so I can reflect on how people thought the hour was spent, or if it's a multi-day strategic session, how did it go?
Right.
And one meeting in particular didn't go well, and I kind of just reflect on it, and it was exactly what we talked about. I had the solutions already figured out, and I really tried to pre-guide a room full of people to the to what I felt like the answer was, and I think it just the feedback coming back from the team wasn't the greatest. I remember kind of looking at it. It's not what I want to have happen at all. So
And then you're able to take a deep breath and go, okay,
okay, yeah,
I walked in thinking I knew the answer, and I didn't listen.
and I didn't listen. And maybe the team would have come to a similar place, but I didn't give them the opportunity. Maybe they would have been in a different place, but creating that environment is important.
Okay. Any particular leaders that you've had in your career that as you observe them, you took lessons away? Either, hey, that was a really important thing I learned on the positive, or yeah, that's something I didn't want to do as a leader.
Well, I think every leader that I've had along the way has had positives and negatives, and every leader you can learn from. And so, it's part of that reflection. Everybody's got a special skill in their job. They're really good at something, and they've
Yes.
got to. I do. Everyone does. My bosses all have, and so just kind of understanding that there's no perfection when it comes to people is important, and really trying to put the best everybody together.
Any particular positive you can point to? Here's something I learned from one of my previous leaders that was a useful nugget as I evolved.
Yeah, I think I had an early leader that was we did a lot of work with mission vision and kind of pulling a bigger group together that thought very broadly and how to pull it into execution. He was just very good at that, and I took a lot of the steps away, and a lot of folks are really good at the big picture things that you need to accomplish, and a lot of people are really good at the execution pieces, but it's a special skill to be able to drive both. And if you can find that attribute in a leader, I've had different leaders that I've worked with that have been excellent at working in a matrixed organization,
Okay.
and leading through influence. And, that is just a hugely valuable skill and one of the biggest leadership characteristics that I look for today, and how I think folks will survive in the new world that's being developed as business is more complex than it ever has.
All
And
right. So I
a
heard a
couple
couple of
things, yeah.
couple of things in there. One, is that there's a ability to conceptualize and think about solutions, and there's ability to execute. And you find that often leaders are good at maybe one, but not the other. And being able to do both is critically important.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need them both. If it's all execution, you don't get the right big picture thinking. If it's all big picture, and you don't do anything with it, it doesn't.
Having really great ideas that don't happen, or having great execution of terrible ideas. So how do you find people that are good at both? How do you get both to happen at Monashcorp?
Yeah, I think that a good example of what we do as a team around our strategic planning is we go off for 4 days and we start very high level, talking about our markets, talking about areas that we might want to expand into, additions to our value proposition, and kind of bring it in to our people, to our operations, what would have to be true, and then just prioritizing to hurts, accountable names, and who's going to do what by when, and so you kind of have to be able to walk through a process that really lets you expand thinking and then get into the execution piece. And it can sometimes be challenging with the team because so many people, including the way I'm wired, is you want to start with the who's going to do what by when, and I've got to let the big picture drift for a while and kind of let it go around the room, and you're not sure where it's going in the beginning, but you got to bring it back. So,
and I assume you find some people that are uncomfortable with the big picture because they want to get to the details, and some people that when you get to the details, they're uncomfortable.
Yeah,
that's not their thing.
Yeah, you need to put them both in the room. That's
wonderful. Anything you've learned from a leader that you took away and said, that's something I'm going to make damn sure I don't do?
I mean,
no names.
No names. So I mean, I'm sure I'll come back to that conversation in a minute. We'll cut this part. But
what do you look for in leaders when you're looking at folks and thinking, that could be somebody who would move up in Monashcorp's leadership hierarchy? What tells you that they might have it?
Yeah. Leading through influence in a matrixed organization is rare to find people that can excel at doing that. And if you can notice it, those people will do very well in a variety of opportunities and different roles in a company, in our company, and I think in any company.
Talk about that distinction. I think if I'm hearing this right, there's leadership through influence, and there's leadership where I'm your boss and I'm telling you. What's the distinction between those two, and why is learning leadership by influence so important a skill?
There are lots of people that they have their lane. Stay in your lane. This is my function, or this is my thing that I can do. But so much of their success depends on a peer's success, or depends on what someone else does in the organization, and taking time to understand their challenges and how to ask questions about how problems are interconnected, between the different things that aren't controlled in one place, is just really, really valuable. We need doers. We need folks that do execution, and there tends to be sort of a limit to how far those people can go on the leadership, the leadership journey, compared to folks that can really understand the business and can hear, can listen, can be empathetic, and can spend a lot of time communicating, which seems like wasted time sometimes when you're trying to get from A to B, but around the goals and what needs to change, and finding solutions, influencing someone else to do something that's going to make you successful.
And now a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh Master of Business Administration program is powerfully positioned to help you advance your career. Join a strong network of more than 3,700 UWO MBA alumni in the Fox Valley and beyond, and take pride in earning a quality business degree from an AACSB accredited institution. Courses are led by award-winning faculty and industry experts, helping you develop personally and professionally during your time here. Take the first step toward an MBA by visiting uwo.sh/MBA to see all that UW-Oshkosh has to offer. That's uwo.sh/MBA. Apply today.
One of the things we hear about in leadership today is EQ. I'm hearing collaboration. Is EQ an important thing? Emotional intelligence, something that you would look for in leaders?
Absolutely. Just that it's so simple, but empathetically listening is just such a core fundamental that you have to have it. Leadership.
Talk about that. What do you mean by empathetically listening?
I think it's, when someone comes in and they have passion around an issue, they might not even be articulating what's at the root on their mind, and it's unpacking what you're hearing and playing it back and checking for understanding to really connect with that person one-on-one. And it's just a fundamental in leadership, and you can train on it and you can work on it, and hard to do. But it's just such an important fundamental.
All right. That's interesting. Now, something like maybe being an empathetic listener, do you think there's some people that are just born leaders? It sounds like you were, in some ways, early on, you gravitated to leadership as a thing.
Yeah.
Your major in college. Are they just born leaders?
I think you have to work at it, and you have to be reflective about it. I don't think it's not something that you wing. You just don't wing it. And I mean, going back to the early training that I've had, I mean, how to empathetically listen has been a part of it. And I've had to constantly remind myself of that, because my personality tendency is to get to the solution, get to it quick, and get results. And that's an important quality too, but it's got to be within a moderated,
leavened a little bit with a more thoughtful approach.
And as you depend on more people to help you, do things, I think just being able to listen and unpack is key.
So is leadership an art or a science debate? Where do you fall?
I would probably be a bit more on the art side than the science side.
Go
leadership.
on.
I just think, well, think about what we've been saying: structured time for unstructured conversation. Empathetically listening. Those are not scientific terms that I would see as core attributes of leaders that are probably most important.
Right.
Versus experience and know how to do every job in the building and
so it's
have
an
every
art.
answer.
There's some people skills in this thing, but it's something you have to work at very thoughtfully.
Right.
So there's almost science underlying the art.
Well, there's different there's different things that happen in a business, right? A business has days that are really good, days that are not so good.
Yes.
And so, those all require different approaches, different urgencies of getting people aligned. And so it's understanding the nuance of when you're in something that can take a little longer and something that's got to be done, quickly.
If I think of it from my teaching perspective, I find some of my days that have been most impactful in terms of modifying my approach to teaching or modifying a particular lecture have been the days that it didn't go well, that I walked out of class going, that wasn't where I wanted it. Have you found that in leadership that being introspective on things that didn't go well is a critical skill?
Yeah, I think reflecting on a meeting that didn't go well. I mean, it could be as simple as that, and not every meeting's a home run. So for a variety of reasons.
Is leadership for everybody? Are there some people that if they indicated to you, I aspire to be a leader, you might think, I don't think that's going to be a good fit for you?
I don't think of leadership as your position in the company.
Go on.
So leadership, I think, is important for everyone. So when you think about the core fundamentals of the kind of culture that you want to have people that care about each other. You want to have people that we'll listen to each other, that we'll be inclusive in the environments that we create for the types of input that um, we're having. We want our employees to feel comfortable to participate in that inclusive, and those are all kind of aspects of leadership. So I don't think of leadership as a hierarchical thing in the definition that I'm.
So, if I'm hearing this properly, you're already looking at what we might think of as leadership skills that somebody's demonstrating before they have any direct reports, before they're leading somebody,
Yeah.
just in the way they act and
Abs-
participate in the organization.
Absolutely. There's peers, there's interactions within an organization. There are very, very few jobs today that are just eyes on a keyboard and we're just
Cranking it.
cranking it. I mean, that in the office environment, I mean, it is about working with people in almost every single aspect of the jobs that exist today.
Okay, so that ability to interact, the EQ, critical skills for someone who's going to be able to move up in the leadership ranks.
Yep.
Okay. You talked about culture a little bit there, that you want people who are supportive. What is the culture that is supportive of the leadership style that you think makes sense?
Well, I think, culture is a huge word, right? So it's kind of like, when you define culture,
we got a little time left. Go ahead.
you want it to be like, it's like communication's a big word,
Yes.
in leadership. But I think you have to write down what you aspire your culture to be. And you have to start with, our team, my team starts with, what are the ground rules for how we're going to be with each other.
Okay.
And those things can cascade throughout the organization. So we want to have an inclusive environment because we know, like even on our current leadership team, we have some voices that are louder than other voices. And so to talk about that is an open thing, that the voices that aren't quite as loud doesn't mean they don't have something great to say. It just means that their personality isn't as comfortable breaking into the conversation. And so we got to create moments, and there isn't a single person that disagrees with that, right? You just get caught up in the heat of the moment. And
Right.
we got 8 people in the room and we've heard from 4 voices. Let's take a minute and hear from the other 4 voices. And we got to create those environments as leaders so that can happen
And you're doing that very intentionally.
And it's hard because it's easy to get caught up in the moment.
Talk to me. You talked about ground rules, I think was your term.
Yep.
Talk more about that. What is that ground rules for how you interact?
Well, we've just we're going to do checkouts at the end of meetings, to see how we did against how we wanted to respond to each other. And purposefully thinking about just some of those things to say aspirationally, were we as inclusive as we wanted to in maybe the meeting or the interaction that we've had. And so you have to reflect on that and help people feel comfortable telling you when you're not so good at that. So,
Okay. So it sounds like you have almost, in the hot jargon now, KPIs. You have almost KPIs for how you interact with each other.
yeah, I think it's important to think about that in an aspirational way. And then are we living it?
Okay. Good. Any historical figures that you would look at and say, now there's a great leader?
Interesting. I've not really, um, have to reflect on that. I mean,
That's okay.
You certainly think I'm a huge sports fan, so I go right to,
Go on.
football coaches that have been great. I think some of the best coaches in the NFL today are not the best play callers. I mean, you see that they're command and control over the offense, the defense, the special teams. That's a big debate if you kind of follow that stuff on what kind of coach someone hires. So,
Talk a little bit about sports. You're a big sports fan. Are there any lessons from sports that you think relate to the question of leadership?
well, I think absolutely everything that we've talked about is important on a sports team, and sports kind of add this element of, you're in it to win as well. And so, how
Right.
do you bring people along, gather ideas, work together to make things happen. I mean, it's just everywhere in sports. That's true.
So if you were the GM of a NFL team and you were interviewing head coach potentials, what would you look for?
Yeah, I think it's leadership, and not every head coach is going to have held every coaching position, on the field more than likely, and so they're going to have to get the best out of their people. Um, you know,
So you'd look more at their leadership skills than their technical football knowledge. It's not whether they have a great offensive game plan.
I think that's right. I mean, you would take it into the context of what the organization needs, right? So if there is no offensive mindset, you might want that leader to come from that background, but primarily not the technical skill. I think is not the overarching requirement. It is about getting the right people on the bus and empowering them to make the right decisions and bring the best out of people.
Right. What's the hardest part of being a leader?
I think s- sometimes you leave at the end of the day and you're like, okay, what did I do today to really make us better? And it doesn't mean that day wasn't really, really full of stuff and of decisions. And it's just full of stuff. And it's kind of like, 80% of the way someone does a job, maybe 90, probably not different from the next person. It's the 10% of the job that defines the difference. And, you know, did you spend time on the 10% today? And that's just something. And there's some days that you walk out and you didn't because the 90 overtook you. And you just got to make sure that doesn't turn into one day, to 2 days, into a week, into a month. And then you haven't done the right things as a leader to develop culture, to empower people, to get the most out of that. So,
So I'm hearing two things in there. One is, are you really focusing on the right stuff? And two, an ambiguity when you walk out of the door at the end of the day, you don't know that you did anything. And you just have to accept that that's being the leader of an organization the size you have. You don't have clear, concrete, yes, wins.
yeah, I think, I mean, there are points in time where you have clear, concrete wins, but the farther that you move along in your career and in an organization, you get a report card at the end of the month. You have lots of things that connect you back to performance, but an individual day, it gets harder to measure the impact on those overarching objectives.
All right, that's the hardest part. What's the most fun part about being a leader?
Oh, it's by far, I think it is the people. I mean, and then when you watch people succeed and you watch people grow, that is just hugely rewarding. Um, watch an organization win on many fronts, hugely rewarding. And so those are the exciting parts.
Strategy. You've talked some about how you approach strategy.
Mhm.
How does strategy, how do you roll that into your leadership approach?
Yeah. Well, we're very purposeful about our strategic planning cycle, and so um, for us, our key leaders, we go off site for about 4 days. Um, once a year. I'll personally spend a great deal of time on the prepping for that. In fact, our meetings this year will come up in early June, and I've got a whole series of get ready meetings for the work that we're going to do for what that process is going to look like. We have some outside help that helps us as well go through that thinking process, but hugely important. And it's about creating that structured time around a series of ideas that we know we want to gather the input of our team, and we want to have some outside work so we have the right data, for those conversations as well. And
How has the leadership challenge evolved over your career from when you were operations and you had whatever, 7 folks reporting to you to now? How is what you need to focus on, what you do, evolve?
well, I think in operations, one of the rewarding things about the operations things that you did is you could try things and you could kind of go out tomorrow and you could see if they worked or you got more, immediate.
There wasn't the ambiguity.
There wasn't the ambiguity. You saw the people that you worked with every day. You worked with them in the same location every day. There was just a lot of opportunity to do things easily, with people. And then as I graduated into maybe more sales related roles or had direct reports with people in different states, that part of you just had to change the tactics a bit, for how you connect with people because it was, just different. You couldn't do it by walking around, the same way that you could in maybe those first jobs that I had.
So in your earlier jobs, more concrete, you can see the outcome quicker, less ambiguity. As you evolve, you need a different skill set. How did you keep taking a deep breath and thinking about what's the new skill set that I need for this new job?
I think one thing that changed is direct direct reports and things became farther like apart.
Yes.
Those meeting times are more important for the kinds of conversations, the one-on-one conversations. And you need to plan and not wing it when it comes to those opportunities because you can't have a new one tomorrow, as
Okay.
easily as you could by walking around. And so probably the same techniques is what was on day one with that operations group that you could see 3 times a day. But now that you can only see that group 3 times a month in person or once a month in person, and it's got to be done more over the phone. Like it's just, you need to kind of plan a little better.
So, if I'm hearing this right, for the folks younger in their careers that are listening to this, as you move up the leadership ranks, you have to become more thoughtful about your approach to leadership and how you're leading, given the
Yeah.
nature of these more distant relationships, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't wing it.
And don't wing it.
Don't wing it.
That's good.
I,
Be- Clearly structured time for unstructured conversations.
yeah.
Don't wing it. Empathetic listening. There's some patterns that come out of these conversations. How do you take care of you? That you've got a lot going on. There's a lot happening clearly in your life. How important is it? And assuming it's important, how do you carve out time to take care of Mike?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, I would just encourage one thing that you love to do. I love being on the water, doing those things. So that is my one place that I can go that I'm able to kind of unplug. It's hard for me to do it everywhere else, but find the one thing.
So find the times where you unplug, whether it's alone in your garage
Yep.
or whether it's out on the water. I've noticed here in Wisconsin that for parts of the year, being out on the water is a little difficult.
Yeah.
How do you do that in the winter?
Well, it's we like to get out of the cold at least a little bit, but it's hard to do. So I definitely have tried a little ice fishing, but that's difficult.
Okay.
It's cold.
But you do try and find some time for yourself so
Yeah.
you can focus on your recharging of your batteries, etc.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Advice. Final piece of advice that you would give to young folks that are in leadership roles or are aspiring to go into a leadership role. What should they be thinking about as they're moving forward?
Think about how to lead through influence. Um, those things will be noticed. Maybe not by your immediate supervisor, but they will be noticed within the organization if you're really good at that. So that's a super important skill set. I think, um, also just grab empowerment. I mean, I kind of look at, we are just looking for people that aren't afraid to kind of dig in and make a decision and make a mistake. And I think most organizations support that. And I think we're hungry to find people that kind of view their environment through that lens, and those kinds of folks are getting noticed.
All right. Well, let's chat about maybe each of those a little bit. Those sound like pretty important nuggets. Leading by influence. You had mentioned that before. How does one do that? If I get direct reports, I tell them to do stuff, and they report to me, etc. How does one lead by influence?
Yeah, and I think we're talking about a leader with 8 direct reports, um, when I say lead by influence, it's not necessarily what you're doing with those 8 direct reports. It's about what's going out sideways,
Right.
maybe up in the organization, maybe in a completely different function, and you've got a problem, and the problem is causing some pain in the organization. You kind of have a choice. It's I'm going to complain about it, and I'm going to throw stones at whoever I think caused it, or I'm going to go in and I'm going to find time to meet with someone else and talk to them about the problem, and can they help me solve it? Or maybe a reflection that what your group of 8 are doing that's causing somebody else a problem, even though it's not causing you a problem, and being open to the conversation, that you're going to help someone else solve a problem that might not be directly affecting your metrics and your accountabilities. And it's just so many people get like one track in the way that they unpack. And
It's just me. It's just my turn. So a lot of the leadership by influence I'm hearing is a willingness to think of an issue from a broader perspective outside of your functional area and talking to these other people about these issues with an open mind.
yep. And I think grab the opportunity to grab different experiences in an organization if you can, I think is also important. So,
Go on. What's that mean?
um, y- for me, it was I started in ops and I went into sales, 2 very different kinds of things, and then
And folks that often don't like each other.
right. So it's like, how can you gain different experiences? And I've seen people in our organization have gone from HR into business roles, or from an operational role into a planning role, into a sales service role. I mean, those kinds of experiences I think are important to.
So part of the career advice is don't be hesitant to get out of your sort of home base and learn a new piece of the organization.
Right.
Empowerment. You talked about empowerment as another thing. Don't be afraid of empowerment. And if I heard this right, this is don't be afraid of grabbing responsibility for something and driving it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, there's a problem. Why? I mean, just kind of reflecting on it while you're out in the garage, saying, what could I do to really go solve this? And I think most people have more levers within their current sphere than they think they have, to actually go solve a problem. And so it's just some reflection on that. But it probably will require some leading by influence, by the way.
Yes. Those dots connect.
Those dots do connect.
My experience has been a lot of folks will think in the garage about the problem, maybe a fairly big focus on why other people are the problem, but it stops in the garage. They don't then go to work and motivate trying to make something happen across these various functional areas. Why do you think people tend to duck that, and what can you do about that?
I don't know that people duck it on purpose. I think that the daily grind, it ends up being what takes the time away from actually doing it. Every new job I've ever taken, I've had many, I have actually had a garage moment while I write down kind of this crazy list. By the way, I don't share it with my boss because I'm really not sure if I want to do everything that goes on to the list.
And the list is, these are things I'd like to do in this job.
Yes. And it's just, and I keep it. And it's just kind of interesting to reflect on it. And each time I've done that, it's not been 100%, what's been knocked off the list, but a lot has. So I just think it gets back to that reflection. And then how do you keep those kinds of goals in front of you? That's the 10% of the job that makes up all the difference versus the 90 that is just kind of doing the fundamentals of it.
So if I'm hearing this right, you have sort of, I'm assuming, 2 sorts of to-do lists. You have here's the stuff I need to get done today. I need to talk to this person, do this. But you have a very big picture to-do list in your head for the roles that you've been in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even going back to those Christmas cards, that was one of the items on the list. Like, how do you get, and so just making some goals. They may not seem like the most important goals, but at the end of the day, I think they're the part of the goals that enable you to be successful.
And so that focus on the big picture and not just getting caught up in the day to day sounds like a theme in this. It relates to that having structured time for unstructured discussions and analysis.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Very good. Any final thoughts on leadership? Things we haven't talked about you think are important to get into people's heads?
I think we've really covered a lot of ground today. It's been an interesting reflection. Leadership is just so important. It's everything. It's not the science or the art form question. It's not about knowing every job in the building. It's about understanding what makes them tick and creating opportunities to help them be successful.
So I assume from what you're saying and the way you're saying it, for someone who's motivated to think about leadership as an approach, you found it to be a rewarding thing to be a leader in an organization in your career.
Oh, absolutely.
And for those of you that are not watching this, but you're listening to this man's eyes are lighting up. When you talk about leadership, you're having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be fun. We spend more time at work with each other than we do with our families. If it's not fun, then something's not right.
So leadership should be fun.
Should be.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to end on that note. I don't think there's a better note to end on than that leadership ought to be fun. Mike, thank you very much for coming in today and sharing your time and experiences with us.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dale.
And thank you for listening to another It's Time podcast from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business. Thank you.
It's Time is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business graduate programs in association with Venture Project Studios. Executive producer, Aaron J. Armstrong. Host, Professor Dale Feinauer. Creative Director, Madison Potratz. Director of Photography, Elazar Kloon. Audio and Video Editor, Elazar Kloon. Marketing Strategy, Tara Larson. Social Media, Anwar Mahana. A special thanks to L Creative, TopView Media, Michael Patton, and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business graduate programs.